I am Reverend Bonnie, the community spiritual leader here at the center. And today, this month, we are looking at the topic of our true nature. What is it that is our true nature? There's all kinds of fun stuff up here in addition to our true nature. So a couple weeks ago when I kicked off the month, I talked about my vision of a storehouse that was filled with everything you could possibly imagine to create your life, the kind of life that you wanted. And that you could go into that storehouse and find all the God qualities in there, everything possible, everything, because we say it's all God. So everything is in the storehouse. So today I want to focus on one thing that you can draw out of that storehouse, and that's joy. The idea of bringing more joy into our life and that quality. Now, it was interesting to me that this month, Science of Mind magazine is all focused on joy. And I actually picked that topic before this showed up in my mailbox. And so it was quite an affirmation for me when our overall community spiritual leader, Dr. Ken Gordon, actually titled his article in here, "Joy is Our Natural State." So I encourage you, if you don't already have this, to get this magazine for this month, because the entire thing is filled with all kinds of ways that we can experience our joy, bring about more joy in our lives. And as you see, Larry asked me, do I have enough notations? It's really spoken to me, and it's obviously helped me to put together some of my thoughts for today. Another aside, and this is definitely not why you should join the church. You should only join the center if you feel called to. But new members get 6-month subscription to that magazine for free. That's a gift from home office. So that's just a little aside and a little perk that comes along with joining the center. So why did I choose joy? Well, one reason is that I do believe joy is one of our natural states. It is a part of who we naturally are. But the real reason that I chose that topic is because that is an area in my life that I've been challenged a lot of my life. I was raised to take life very seriously. I was taught to not get too excited about a lot of things. If you asked me throughout my life if I was happy, I would probably say yes. And if you asked me if I was content, I would say yes. But joy, am I experiencing joy? That one is a challenge for me sometimes. I haven't always felt like that was what was going on for me. Ernest Holmes defines joy in the Science of Mind textbook as the emotion excited by the expectancy of good. The emotion excited by the expectancy of good. Then he puts gladness, delight, and exultation. How often would you say you're experiencing exultation? That's not something that I go around feeling all the time. So for me, this has been an area where I've had to really look when I started thinking about joy as my natural state. So why would I take this on, and why would I not necessarily think I'm experiencing joy all the time? Well, like I said, I've been taught to take life very seriously. And the other thing that happened is I took on at some point, I know definitely in high school, the belief that if there was anyone else in the world suffering, I had no right to be joyful. I have always been an avid journaler, and I would spend every night in high school journaling, and I would be writing about all the woes that my friends were experiencing, all the woes in the world, and I would cry and cry and cry. I think I cried every night through the entire high school year. And then I'd go to school and I'd act all happy and everything was fine. But inside, I was feeling this deep sorrow for the world and for my friends and what was going on around me. And I did really believe that how could I express joy if they were suffering, if there was, these problems going on somewhere else. The other thing that I think played into this is the fact that in my household, really and truly, children were to be seen and not heard. And so we got in trouble if we were having a grand time and making a lot of noise, or if we were fighting and making a lot of noise. And so I think I learned to kind of subdue everything, to stay quiet, to stay under the radar. And I started thinking as I put this together, how many children do you know express joy through silence? I don't think they can. That's not how children experience and express joy. So that was another thing that I did, is I dampened things and learned how to stay quiet. Then this idea was reinforced when I got into high school. I joined a youth choir. I loved singing. I loved being a part of the choir. I sang in choirs in high school, at the school, as well as in my church. And at the church, our youth choir did the musical Godspell. And if you're familiar with that, they take the parables of Jesus' teachings and they put them to music and dance. And the people wore costumes that were brightly colored and were definitely not the fashion of the day. So what ended up happening is at one of our performances, we had protesters outside because they felt like we were making Jesus look like a clown. And they had signs that said, Jesus wept. And something to the effect, I don't remember the exact words, but he suffered for us and for our sins, so we should also suffer, was the message. So again, I think it was part of the race consciousness, that the idea was that this teaching was, about the suffering and the weeping that went on and not necessarily the joy. And the musical was bringing out the joyful aspect of those teachings. But I saw that and started thinking, that was sort of telling me again, we can't get too excited and too happy when somebody else has suffered, especially for us and on our behalf. So obviously in my life, there wasn't a lot early on that encouraged me to experience and express what I would call joy. Not that they wanted me to be unhappy, but joy to me is something different. It has a lot more energy to it. And then the other thing that I've learned and that I thought about as I was considering the role of joy in my life is that in psychology they tell us that if you watch someone else suffer, the person that's observing somebody else experiencing either a trauma or suffering also is impacted by that, and sometimes even in a greater psychological way than the person who's experiencing it. And so I started thinking, well, who was I serving by crying and suffering right along with everybody else? If people are observing that in my life and they're seeing me as sad or not enjoying life, how is that serving people? Because they're just going to see someone that's also sad and suffering. So the new thought that I have started to understand in my life is this role and this ability to express and understand and experience joy as my true nature. So imagine watching children play, and really playing, having fun, enjoying time together. And if children doesn't do it for you, imagine puppies. One of the greatest things that we have is to watch our little ones race around the house. They love to chase each other all over the house. Or kittens playing. I'm already seeing the smiles. Just imagining it brought a feeling of joy. So what that said to me is that witnessing joy can also make someone else feel joy. And so how am I serving if I'm not expressing the joy that's my true nature? It's okay if I express that joy, I could possibly make somebody else smile just by observing it in my life. So Ernest Holmes said that joy is the emotion of the emotion excited by the expectancy of good. And I think I can say pretty clearly that I'm not sure I expected a lot of good when I was in high school. I was kind of expecting the drama to continue or the issues to continue, whatever they were. And so if the expectancy of good is what brings about joy, in the reading that Martha did for us, Ernest Holmes, that was also Ernest Holmes' words that she was reading out of the archives of a radio talk that he gave. He said, "Joy goes before me and prepares the way." Joy, the expectancy of good, goes before me and prepares the way. So there we are, back to how we're thinking. If we're expecting our good, that prepares the way for joy and for good to show up. And if we're expecting something else, then maybe we're not going to experience as much joy. So again, when I started to understand these teachings, it was a new thought for me to think about my life and the fact that it could be joyful. And so I came up with what I called my purpose statement, but maybe I could just also call it a goal, that I want to give God a good time through me. And what I was basically telling myself is it's okay to have fun. It was okay to be joyful, which, like I said, was a new thing for me, and I'm still working on perfecting it. I'm not sure that I allow that to happen all the time. But I was saying it was okay to be joyful. So back to that original thought about taking life seriously. Can we take life seriously and still be joyful? Can those two things come together? Well, in here, there's an article called Creating a Joy-Filled Life, and Reverend Petra Weldress wrote the article, and she concluded it. And so I want to read you her conclusion with this story. The morning my mother died was a beautiful, crisp, sunny November day. As we drove through the bright golden leaves drifting across the road to the nursing home, I found myself filled with such a deep sense of wonder and joy. My mother had no fear of death due to her deep faith. Driving that morning, I felt her melt into the sun and the wind, into the universal love. Arriving at the door of her room, seeing her lying there, I burst into deep grieving that lasted months. I missed my mother almost every day for 10 years. Yet the joy of having her as my mother and the joy of knowing the spiritual truth about her has never left me. So what is this joy that we seek? How can we feel sorrow, pain, loss, anxiety, or fear and still have an abiding joy in life? Joy isn't just an emotion like happiness that is the result of something that happens to us. It's not purely a response to getting a promotion or finding love or going on vacation. Joy is a state of being, an internal awareness, a way of living from the inside out. Joy is an inside job, and it's based on the inner awareness of spiritual reality, the power and presence of the one life, the one love, as it's living in and through and as us. Joy is the manifestation of living our spirit-filled lives. Thinking of joy as a state of being relieves us of pursuing it. Rather, we find our joy when we bring our whole selves to the table in every act, in every conversation, in every moment. Or perhaps we could more properly say, joy finds us. So that was her conclusion and her understanding of how to live a joy-filled life. And the idea, again, is that it's coming from within us and moving outward. So we say that this is our true nature. This is a part of who we are. Then why is it then at times we aren't aware of that or we're not necessarily feeling that? Well, I've shared with you before that when I was serving at Wellspring, they have a benediction that they say. And the last sentence of that benediction is, joy, peace, and eternal life are our true nature, and they flow through us into the world. And what I started to think about is that joy is connected with this idea of flowing a lot. We say someone is overflowing with joy. We talk about letting your joy out. We don't say let your joy in. We usually talk about let your joy out. So somewhere deep within us, we understand that joy starts in here. It's inside us and needs to move out. So as I thought about that concept of flowing, I started thinking about a natural spring flowing up out of the earth and how that clear water comes out of the earth and flows down and becomes a stream and can grow into a river. And so at times there are things that can block that. People throw their trash in there, old tires, a boot, a couple cans along the way. And if there's a storm, the dirt from the side of the banks usually gets in there and makes it all muddy and turbulent looking. But as soon as the storm settles and the mud settles, and as soon as we remove the stuff, that water quickly moves in and fills that space with no real super hard energy. It's just you move the stuff and it's there. It takes over. It's back in that space. And so I started seeing joy as that in my life. If we remove the stuff, let the mud settle, it's already ready to just move right in, to take over. We don't have to go seeking it or do anything other than clear the space. Reverend Petra's story, I can strongly relate to, and I know a lot of you in here can relate to that who have lost your mothers already. When my mother passed, that was the most severe amount of grief I think I've ever experienced. I had not had anything like that in my life prior to that. And so I was trying to deal with that and figure out, what's a normal amount of grief and what might be too much, all that kind of stuff. And about 7 months into that experience, Reverend Sam up at Wellspring had a talk, and he said, and I know I've shared this with you before, but I'm sharing it again because these words were just so impactful to me. He said, if you're not experiencing joy, you're not in alignment with God. And that was like, oh, because here I was thinking I'm a minister. Of course I'm in alignment with God. I had my own spiritual practice. I was doing all this stuff. But he said, if you're not experiencing joy, you're not in alignment with God. And at that moment, I could say I was not experiencing joy. And so I took that almost as a mandate to look at what was going on in my life and what did I need to do to experience joy, to be more in alignment with God. What would it take? What was going on that was blocking that natural flow in and through me? So how can we then start to experience more joy? What can we do to make the space for that, to clear things out? Well, one of the things that we already heard is that expectancy of good. I think when we do treatment, the third step is that statement of the expectancy of good that we're wanting to bring into our lives. And so the first two steps, and again, I'm going to push classes because if you don't know what I'm talking about, you would learn this in class. What we look at in terms of how we get in alignment with God, recognizing what those qualities are, recognizing our oneness with them, and then we move into that expectancy of good, which is where the joy comes from. And so I thought, well, what more can we do? What more can I do to have that expectancy of good? And to bring that into my life and to get more aligned. So in here, one of the articles is called Joy is a Choice. And the last part of the article, there are 7 questions that are presented that they call important questions for living joyfully. And there are a lot of other exercises in here of how to bring more joy into your life. So again, I really do encourage you, if you don't have this, we've got it in the bookstore. It's a good collection of joy right here. But I was going to share with you these 7 questions just as ideas for you to think about. The first one, are your aspirations and ambitions in alignment with the legacy you want to live and leave? I'll repeat that one. Are your aspirations and ambitions in alignment with the legacy you want to live and leave? Now, when I read that word legacy really struck me again, because a couple years ago, I had the privilege of going to a minister's training through serving here, actually at that time as interim minister. And one of the things they took us through in our experience over that weekend was creating the idea in our minds of what we wanted as our legacy. And until then, I had never even thought about that. It never even crossed my mind that I might want to consider what my legacy was. I was just living my life. I hadn't thought about what would be left behind and how I would be remembered. And so then this question is saying, is what we're doing today in alignment with how we want to be remembered, what it is we want to leave behind? That's one way to live in joy. The second question, when was the last time you gave someone the benefit of the doubt or forgave them? I'm just going to let you think. The third question, do you extend compassion and forgiveness to yourself? And when I thought about that river filled with trash, as we pull it out, we don't sit there and blame the river for the fact that the trash got thrown in there. Likewise, I think as we remove the blockage to our joy, we don't need to sit there and get down on ourselves. So do we extend compassion and forgiveness to ourselves? Number 4, if your forgiveness factor is low, what is the payoff for staying angry? Just food for thought. If your forgiveness factor is low, what is the payoff for staying angry? Number 5, what 3 impossibilities became realities for you? So what 3 things, can you think back in your life, were there at least 3, there might have been more, and if you think of just one, that's great too, but what 3 things did you think were impossible and yet they became realities in your life? Number 6, imagine there were limiting beliefs and judgments keeping you from soaring higher, lighter, and living a joy-filled life. What would they be? So again, what is that trash that's in the river that's stopping your flow of your inner joy? What is that stuff that needs to be removed? And then this one I think is a great one for you to take home as homework. This is the last one, number 7. List 7 ways you can create and foster countless moments of joy in your life. Now, they just say list 7. I think you can go for more than that if you want. But 7 ways you can create and foster countless moments of joy in your life. What things can you do that are going to bring about more joy? And then, of course, I have to add, so what can you do to remove some of that debris? And I'm putting in another plug for classes. And I say that because, again, we are a teaching philosophy. The part that we do on Sunday is really the icing on the cake. The deeper work that brings that joy into our lives is what we do in classes, when we come together and we look at all that stuff and we get to clear it, and we do it in a loving environment with people that are also doing the same thing and can support us in that practice. And if you don't want to take a class to do that, we now have 6 amazing practitioners that are willing to work with you one-on-one. So make an appointment with a practitioner. And then, if you'd rather not do it with somebody else, what's happening in your spiritual practice? The time that you take, do you take time to think about questions like that? Work through it, look at what that debris might be and how come it might be there, and cast it aside. As I was doing this, of course, I've been thinking about, well, what would have made me so serious? Why did I come up with this way of being in the world? And this morning, I had an awareness that came out of a dream. And I realized that my mother was an only child. So she had no idea what it was like to share life with a sibling. So her idea in raising us was that everything had to be fair, which meant that when my brother was punished for doing something, I couldn't do whatever they took away from him because that wouldn't be fair. Yeah, so I realized this morning that again gave, was sort of this thing of if somebody else is suffering, you can't have joy. And I don't think she intended to take my joy away. It was like an aha this morning. Oh, well, she doesn't know what it was like to be with a sibling. She doesn't know that siblings sometimes get to do things and their other sibling doesn't. She had no idea. So that was her idea of fairness. So again, as you contemplate this stuff, it was like, okay. When those awarenesses come, you get to just release it and let it go and realize, oh, okay, that's all it was. That's all it was, and I can just let it go. And if all that stuff is too hard, if you don't want to go through classes, you don't want to take the time on your own, I have an easy one for you. I think this one's a lot easier. Think about, just in your mind's eye, what brings you joy. Think about something that happens, a time when joy is moving through you. What is it? What are you doing? What are you experiencing? Maybe think about something that's good that you're expecting and feel the joy that comes from that expectancy. What might that be? And as you let these things pop into your head, could you say these are things that you're grateful for? Yeah. So that to me is one of the easiest things you can do is, of course, when you're feeling joy, you can move into gratitude. But if you're not feeling joy, you can think about what it is you're grateful for, and that will bring about joy. Again, one of the things that they put in here for us is a quote from Brother David Steidlratz, a Benedictine monk, and he said, "The root of joy is gratefulness. It is not joy that makes us grateful. It is gratitude that makes us joyful." And so I think one of the simplest things we can do is just think about what we're grateful for and allow that to move us into a place of joy. I know that we have 2 people in this congregation who post their gratitude first thing in the morning on Facebook, what they're grateful for, and they're doing it every day of the year. So it's whichever number of that day, they're posting their sense of gratitude, and just reading it fills me with gratitude. And so find a way to remember what you're grateful for, and that in and of itself can bring about joy in your life. And then there's one last thing. And this one might seem simple, but for some of us, and I'm saying us, it's not always an easy thing to do. Think back to when you were imagining the kids playing, the puppies, the kittens playing. When kids are playing, or when animals are playing, are they thinking, I want to experience joy in my life? Are they thinking, are we having fun yet? No. I think joy is a natural byproduct of play. And play is one of those things I'm still really working at learning. That's why I have Brenda in my life. She brings the play. She brings that level of joy and playfulness that I did not grow up with. And so when we're in play, when we're in that level of having fun, the joy, the exuberance just flows out of us. So what do you do to play? Do you believe, have you bought into that belief that we're too old to play? No. Oh, good. He's shaking his head. No. So if we're not too old to play, what do? How do you bring that playful element into your life? What does joy sound like as it moves through you? Is it music? Are you playing music and that's a joyful thing? Or is there a certain sound? So now, I know some people this could make uncomfortable, so if it does, then you just sit there and enjoy watching other people express joy. But I'm going to ask you right now to go back to imagining what brings you joy. Think about something that you're expecting, that you're feeling joyful about, or that you already are experiencing that brings you joy. And now imagine that you're that little kid getting exactly what you want. What is the sound that you make? Make it. Stand up if you want to. Make that sound. What is that sound? What's joy sound like? Woohoo! All right. More. You're getting exactly. All right. Okay. Whew, isn't that great? To let it through, to make some sound with our joy. Joy is our true nature, and it flows through us into the world. Joy is my true nature, and it flows through me into the world. If you'd like to say that with me, joy is my true nature, and it flows through me into the world joyfully. Joy is my true nature, and it flows through me into the world, and so it is. Thank you, Randy.